It's 6:45 a.m., and I'm standing at the door of my childhood home, my fingers gripping the cold, tarnished doorknob. I've spent the last 5 years running from this place, from the expectations, the judgments, the constant feeling of being less than. I'm Emily Carter, and I've made something of myself, but they don't know that yet. They have no idea who I've become. I left this house when I was 25, and I didn't look back. My dad, John Carter, the successful corporate titan, told me I'd never make it. The military's for people who have no real future, he said, as if the weight of his words meant something to me. I was never the daughter who fit into his polished vision, the one who could step into his world and follow his blueprint. So I walked away, and I found a future of my own. Now I'm back, but I'm not the same person who left. This isn't the visit I once dreaded. This isn't about family dinners filled with fake smiles and subtle dismissals. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, when my father and brother sit at that corporate table, their world will come crashing down, because I'm not just Emily, I'm Colonel Emily Carter, and I hold the power to decide the future of their most lucrative military contract. They don't know that the disappointment they once labeled me as is the very person who's been running the show behind the scenes. I've earned my place, and tomorrow I'll sit in the room that they think belongs to them, with more authority than they could ever imagine. But tonight, I'll let them have this moment, the moment where they still believe they're in control, the moment where they can still call me captain without realizing the truth. It's a small price to pay for what's coming next. Tomorrow, I'll walk into that meeting room and they'll finally see who I am. The silence that follows will speak volumes. But tonight, I'm just Emily, and I'm ready to turn the page. I stepped into the house, feeling the familiar warmth of the kitchen, the same floral scent that always seemed to linger in the air. Everything looked the same. The chipped welcome mat by the door, the faded front door that I'd always hated, the worn-out furniture in the living room, where I'd spent countless evenings pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. "Emily, you're just in time," my mom's voice called from the kitchen, a little too cheerful, but I could hear the emptiness in it. She didn't really mean it. She didn't even know what was going on in my life. They didn't. They never did. And at this point, I wasn't sure if I cared to change that. I took off my jacket and hung it on the back of the chair, the same chair I always sat in when I was younger, right in the corner, out of the way, where nobody would really notice me. It was like the spot was made for someone who wasn't meant to be seen. Logan, my brother, was already there, of course. He had been the golden child, the one who followed the script my dad had written for us all: business school, a corner office, climbing up the corporate ladder like it was a race he was destined to win. I could hear him laughing with my dad in the next room. His voice was the same as always, loud, confident, and filled with that air of superiority that had always irritated me. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" Logan asked, his voice carrying that tone of entitlement. He never had to ask, he knew. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and the side salad that never changed. A family tradition, one that my mom had been making for years. It was safe, familiar, predictable, just like everything else in this house. "Dinner's almost ready," my mom said, not bothering to look up from the stove. "Logan just got another promotion. He's leading the systems integration team now. Everyone at your father's company says he's going places." Going places, I couldn't help but think, the words like a knife in my chest. That used to be my line, my dream, my goal. But now it just sounded hollow. It always had, whenever my parents used it as a way to remind me I had somehow missed the train. Like they thought I was stuck, standing still, while Logan raced ahead. I smiled politely, trying not to show how much that phrase bothered me. "That's great, Mom," I said, keeping my tone neutral. But inside, my thoughts were racing. I didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. The woman they thought was just wasting her potential, that woman had long since left this house. And the person sitting at the table now, well, they weren't going to recognize her until it was too late. Dinner started without much fanfare. Logan continued to talk about his work, his promotions, how he was making waves in the company. My father nodded along, pride shining in his eyes as he listened to his son. Meanwhile, my mom kept stealing glances at me, her smile polite, but there was something missing, something that said she didn't truly understand the path I'd chosen. She asked if I was still moving around a lot with the army, like it was some kind of temporary phase, like I wasn't committed to the life I'd built for myself. I didn't answer at first. What was the point? They wouldn't get it. They never did. Instead, I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip, letting the awkward silence fill the space. My father didn't even look up from his plate when he asked, "Are you still a captain?" His voice didn't hold the weight of curiosity or respect, just the empty politeness that made me feel like I was invisible. "Something like that," I muttered, looking down at my plate, knowing full well that tomorrow none of this would matter. Tomorrow I would show them exactly who I was. But for now, I'd play my part in their little charade. Logan asked if it was tough being out in the field all the time, like it was some kind of burden, something unimportant, something that didn't require strategy or skill. Again, I didn't answer, because tomorrow, when they saw me in that boardroom, standing tall in my uniform, when they heard someone call me Colonel Carter, all of this would change. They would realize that I hadn't been stuck at all. I had been building something they couldn't even begin to understand. But for now, I let them talk. I excused myself from the table, leaving the conversation to float in the air behind me, a mix of corporate talk and my father's hollow praise for Logan. The sounds of their laughter echoed down the hall as I made my way upstairs to my old room, the one place in this house that felt like it still belonged to me. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I paused for a moment, taking in the space that had once been my sanctuary. But now it just felt empty, like a ghost of the person I used to be. The room hadn't changed much since I left. The same basketball trophies lined the shelves, their polished surfaces reflecting the memories of a time when I was supposed to be the athlete, the one who excelled in everything. Next to them were my honor roll certificates, my college acceptance letters, and the framed photos of achievements I'd once been proud of. All of it was on display for the world to see, yet there was no trace of the life I'd built after I walked out that door 5 years ago. There were no military awards, no photos from my deployments, not even the article I had sent home when I was promoted to major. It was as if I had never existed in this space. The walls told one story, and the rest of my life told another. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. The familiar quilt that had been sewn by my grandmother when I was 12, still resting over the mattress, felt like an anchor pulling me back to who I once was, the daughter they thought was destined for failure. My father had always had a vision of me, and it didn't involve camouflage or boots or the Pentagon. It involved corner offices, board meetings, and a life of prestige that I was supposed to share with him. But I had walked away from that. I had chosen a different path, one they didn't understand. And it hurt. It hurt more than I ever let on. I had always known what my father thought of my decision to join the Army. The day I told him I'd been accepted into the ROTC program, he had looked at me with disgust, like I had thrown away a future just to prove some point. He said it to my face. The military is for people who don't have real potential. His words still stung. He had planned my future, but I had never fit into his mold, and it was clear he thought I was wasting mine. My brother, Logan, was always the one who got the praise, the one who never questioned the script. And I was the cautionary tale, the one who had missed the mark. But what hurt even more was the fact that I had tried so hard to make them proud. I called, I sent updates, I even tried to invite them to my commissioning ceremony. But every time, it was the same empty responses. We're busy, or we don't understand what this means. And in that silence, I began to realize something important. They didn't just not get it. They didn't want to get it. They didn't want to see the woman I had become, the one who had clawed her way up through the ranks, not for their approval, but for something much deeper. Something that had nothing to do with them at all. I pulled the uniform from the suitcase, the midnight blue fabric smooth against my fingers. The insignia gleamed in the soft light of the room. The eagle, my symbol of honor and pride, was a reminder of everything I had worked for. The long nights, the countless hours of training, the sacrifices I'd made. But as I stared at the uniform, I knew it wasn't just about the accolades or the stripes. It was about who I had become, who I had proven myself to be. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom, and I would finally show them who they had refused to see all these years. But tonight, I had to wrestle with this, with the ghosts of my past, with the hurt I had buried so deep inside. I had to let it all go, to make room for the person I was now, a colonel, a leader, a woman who had earned every inch of respect she had. This wasn't about proving anything to them. This was about proving it to myself. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped caring whether they saw me at all. The woman who had been their disappointment no longer existed. Tomorrow, they would see the woman who had quietly. The morning light streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. It felt almost surreal, the calm before the storm. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, adjusting my color one last time. My uniform was perfect, midnight blue, polished to a shine. The eagle insignia gleamed with pride. This wasn't just fabric, it was the symbol of everything I had worked for. Every step, every sacrifice, every moment I had fought for, it was all woven into that uniform. And today, I would wear it with purpose. Today, it would speak louder than any words. I took a deep breath as I stepped out of my apartment, my heels clicking on the pavement as I made my way to the car. The city was waking up around me, people rushing to start their day, unaware that today, my life would change forever. I slid into the driver's seat, the weight of the morning sinking in. My phone buzzed, a message from my superior. We're ready for you. See you in 30. I pulled into the parking lot of Cybertech Systems, the defense contractor where my father and brother had built their careers. It was a sleek glass and steel tower, a symbol of everything my family had worked for. And yet, as I parked in my designated spot, marked Military Liaison, DoD authorized, I felt a sense of power I had never known before. This space, this building, this company, they had no idea what was about to unfold. I could feel eyes on me as I stepped out of the car, adjusting my uniform one last time before walking towards the entrance. The security guard looked up and immediately straightened, his gaze flicking from my uniform to my badge. "Good morning, Colonel," he said, his voice sharp with respect. I nodded, stepping past the reception desk without a second glance. There was no need to stop, no need to explain myself. Today, the world would recognize me for who I was. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. I could feel the tension building in my chest, but I held it in check. This wasn't about nerves. This was about the quiet power that comes from knowing you belong in a room, even if no one else thinks you do. The doors opened, and there they were, Logan, my father, and the rest of the senior executives. My heart skipped a beat when I saw them. I could tell Logan had no idea what was going on. He stood by the window, flipping through a tablet, his posture relaxed. My father was deep in conversation with two men in matching Navy suits, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. When Logan saw me, his face went from casual confidence to immediate confusion. "Juliet?" he asked, blinking as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. The shift in his voice was subtle, but I caught it. The tone was different now, uncertain. My father turned at the sound of Logan's voice, his expression faltering when he saw me. He froze in place, his mouth opening as if he were about to speak, but no words came out. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't need to. I walked straight past them, my heels clicking against the floor like a declaration, like a promise of everything that was about to change. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," I said, my voice steady as I addressed the group. I turned to the CEO of the company, Lorraine Hart, who was standing near the door. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, a smile spreading across her face. "Colonel Carter, I didn't realize you'd be here in person," she said, extending her hand. "A pleasure," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Of course," I replied, "I thought it would be useful to sit in on the briefing myself." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. The irony of it all, the woman they had written off, the one who had been cast aside, now standing here as the person with the most influence in the room. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't for me to break. Not yet. Lorraine turned to the group behind her, her voice now carrying a tone of respect and authority that I had never heard before. For those unaware, this is Colonel Emily Carter, our Pentagon liaison for Project Sentinel. She has final approval authority for all military integrations on this project. I didn't look at my father or brother. I didn't need to. The room had already shifted. The meeting had gone smoothly. Almost too smoothly. Everyone in the room had known their place, their role, and now, as the last executive walked out, a silence settled. But this silence wasn't the same. It wasn't the kind of uncomfortable silence I had once experienced in family dinners, where words were heavy with judgment and each pause felt like a nail in my coffin. No, this silence was different. This one was filled with recognition, the kind of silence that happens when the world shifts and no one can pretend they didn't feel it. I remained in the conference room for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Lorraine Hart had given me a nod of approval, a smile of respect. Her words, though simple, echoed in my ears. Colonel Carter, your insight has been invaluable. Your technical guidance has already refined key aspects of our cyber protocol design. In that moment, I didn't need my father's approval. I didn't need anyone else's. I had earned this. My presence, my position, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. But as I left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that my family was about to learn something they weren't prepared for. They were going to see me in a light they had never considered before, and I was about to be the one to make them face it. When I walked into the hallway, I saw my father first. He was standing just outside the conference room, his back slightly hunched, his eyes still wide with disbelief. He hadn't moved. He hadn't come after me. He had watched me walk past him. And in that moment, I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Was it regret? Was it the realization that everything he thought he knew about me was wrong? "Emily," he said, his voice tight, the edge of authority that once ruled every conversation now replaced with something else, uncertainty, maybe even fear. "We need to talk." I turned slowly, my heart pounding, but I kept my composure. "In your office," I replied, the words calm, almost rehearsed. There was no rush. No need to act like I hadn't been preparing for this moment for years. As I followed him down the corridor, I could feel Logan behind me, his presence unmistakable. I had known he would be there, lurking in the background, just as he had always done. Always in the spotlight, always the one to steal the show. But today, for once, I wasn't the one stepping aside. We reached my father's office. The door creaked as we entered, and I noticed my mom was already there, sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Logan stood by the window, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched. They all looked like they had been caught in a storm they weren't prepared for. This wasn't the family I had left behind all those years ago. This wasn't the family who had written me off. This was something else. A family on the edge of realizing the truth. My father cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between me and my brother. "Emily," he began again, his voice shaky, "how long have you been a colonel?" "6 months," I replied, my voice steady. "6 months," he repeated slowly, his eyes narrowing. "And you never told us?" "I did," I said quietly. "I sent invitations to my promotion ceremony. I left messages. I even sent articles and emails. I did everything I could to reach out." I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. He opened his mouth, but my mother, who had been silent until now, interrupted him. "We didn't know what it meant," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. The same old excuses. I could already hear the words before they were spoken. This wasn't about understanding. This was about their refusal to see me, to see the woman I had become. I wasn't the daughter they had planned for. I wasn't the one who fit into their mold, and they hadn't known how to deal with that. "Because I stopped trying to justify my worth," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "Every time I called, you asked about Logan's promotions, about your quarterly numbers. Every time I tried to share something, you brushed me off. You never asked about me unless it was to suggest I quit the army and come home." Logan shifted uncomfortably at my words. He didn't say anything at first, but I saw his expression change. Guilt? Realization? Maybe a bit of both. "We thought you were stuck," he said quietly, almost defensively. I shook my head, a bitter smile forming on my lips. "You said last night that people in the military just follow orders." You laughed when you said it. His face reddened. I didn't know. I stood at the edge of the room, my hands clasped behind my back, trying to absorb everything that had just unfolded. There was a weight in the air now, something thick and uncomfortable that hadn't been there before. My father's apology was unexpected, but it didn't feel like closure. Not yet. There was something else, something unspoken, that lingered beneath the surface of our conversation. The silence between us was different now, less hostile, less defensive. But it wasn't the end of our story, not by a long shot. As I turned to leave the office, my eyes caught the faintest glimmer of something, a letter. It was sticking out from beneath a stack of files on my father's desk. The envelope was plain, unmarked, and folded in a way that suggested it had been opened in haste. My heart skipped a beat. It was strange. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to pick it up. "Emily," my father called, but I didn't stop. I wasn't sure why I was doing this, but something about the letter made me feel like I had to know what was inside. I slid it out from under the stack, quickly scanning the page. The words seemed to blur at first, but then they became clearer. My throat tightened as I read the contents. It wasn't a letter from the Pentagon or some official military document. No, this was personal. It was a letter from a lawyer. My father had been hiding something that had been kept from me all these years. The letter was addressed to my father. It was a legal document outlining something about the family trust, and most importantly, it mentioned my brother, Logan. The words inheritance, special provisions, and final will jumped out at me. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just about the business. This was something deeper, something more sinister. I had no idea what it meant, but I could feel it in my gut. This was about more than just family expectations. This was about control. Logan had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, the one who would inherit it all. But this letter, this piece of paper, was telling a very different story. It wasn't about his success or his rise through the company. It was about my place in the family. Suddenly, everything started to click. The subtle ways my father had always undermined my decisions, the way he dismissed my military career, the endless praises heaped upon Logan, it all came back to this: the trust, the inheritance, and the family's deep-rooted need to maintain control, no matter the cost. I folded the letter back up, my hands trembling as I slid it into my pocket. I didn't know what to do with this information. My father had clearly been hiding something from me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to confront him just yet. But I knew one thing: this changed everything. I wasn't just fighting for my respect anymore. This was about something bigger than I could have imagined. The truth about our family and about my role in it was slipping out from under the surface. I walked back into the living room where my family had gathered. They were all sitting together, quietly chatting. The tension had eased somewhat since the confrontation in my father's office, but there was still a heaviness in the air. I knew what I had just discovered had the potential to shatter everything. It was too much to keep to myself, and yet I couldn't bring myself to reveal it just yet. Not now. I needed time to process this. As I stood in the doorway, I felt a shift in the room. Logan looked up at me first, his expression guarded but curious. He was still unsure of what was going on, still in that place of shock and disbelief. My father, too, was watching me, his eyes searching for something, for an answer, for a sign, for a hint that I would let this slide, that I wouldn't dig any deeper. But I couldn't. As I turned to leave the office, my eyes caught the faintest glimmer of something, a letter. It was sticking out from beneath a stack of files on my father's desk. The envelope was plain, unmarked, and folded in a way that suggested it had been opened in haste. My heart skipped a beat. The air felt heavier the next morning. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing through the implications of what I had discovered the night before. The letter, the lawyer's words, the truth that had been buried so deep, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had a family meeting scheduled for noon, and I knew it was time. Time to confront the secrets that had been hiding in the shadows for years. I walked into my father's office that morning, the legal document still tucked into the inner pocket of my jacket, where it felt like a weight I couldn't shake. I hadn't told anyone about what I had found, but today, that would change. Today, everything I had been holding in, everything I had been waiting to reveal, would come to light. When I stepped into the office, my father was already sitting behind his desk, looking tired, like he hadn't rested at all. Logan was standing by the window, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the skyline outside. They hadn't said a word since I had left the night before, and I knew they were waiting for me to speak first. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of me holding back. Not anymore. So, I began, my voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension in the room. We need to talk about that letter. The shift in my father's expression was subtle, but I saw it. His eyes darted briefly to Logan, then back to me. He knew what I was talking about. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if everything was closing in on us. I could feel Logan's gaze on me, his nervous energy now palpable. This wasn't the casual conversation we had the night before. This was the reckoning. My father didn't speak immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk, like he was trying to gather his thoughts. Logan shifted, and I could see his jaw tighten. They weren't ready for this, but I didn't care anymore. I needed the truth. I found it, I said quietly, reaching into my jacket and pulling out the letter. I laid it down on the desk in front of them, watching as my father's face paled just a little. Logan didn't make a sound, but I could see the shock in his eyes. The letter was simple, legalistic, but its implications were clear. I had read it enough times to know exactly what it said. The family trust, the inheritance, and the clauses about the business, none of it was as straightforward as they had led me to believe. It wasn't about who was deserving, it was about control. It was about how my brother had been set up to inherit everything, how I had been written out, sidelined. And the most gut-wrenching part of it all, it wasn't just business, it was personal. "You've been keeping this from me," I said, my voice steady but fierce. "For how long? All these years you've pretended like my career didn't matter. You've pretended like I didn't exist. But this proves everything I've been trying to tell you. I'm not just some afterthought. I'm not just a disappointment." My father swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Logan's eyes shifted from me to the letter, then back to my father. It was like a moment frozen in time. Everything I had fought for, everything that had been hidden, was laid bare in front of them. "I didn't want this for you," my father finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted you to be part of this family, to follow in my footsteps. But you," he trailed off, his words faltering, "I thought you were throwing it all away." "I wasn't throwing anything away," I replied sharply. "I chose a different path because I knew what I was capable of, and you refused to see it. You refused to acknowledge me for who I truly am." The room grew quiet, and I could feel the weight of my words sinking in. Logan, standing by the window, still hadn't said anything, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Maybe he was finally understanding. Maybe he was finally seeing me for who I was, not just his sister, but as someone who had worked harder than anyone to get where she was. You've been hiding the truth from me for years, and now it's time to face it, I continued, my voice softening just a bit. You've never respected my choices, never respected the path I chose. But now you're going to see me. You're going to see what I've built, and you'll have no choice but to recognize it. There was a long pause as my father processed my words. The next few days were a blur of emotions, confessions, apologies, and uncomfortable truths. My father's office had become the scene of so many long overdue conversations, and I could feel the shift within the walls of our family dynamic. But as much as I had fought for recognition, I realized something profound in those quiet, tense moments. It wasn't just about winning the respect of my father or brother. It was about my own internal peace, about finally understanding that I didn't need their validation to know I had value. The hardest part wasn't confronting them. It was learning how to let go of the anger that had festered inside me for so long. It had felt like a fire, simmering beneath the surface, ready to burn everything in its path. But now that the truth was out there, the fire was no longer fueled by bitterness. It was tempered by understanding. I didn't need their approval to define myself anymore. That was the victory. The real healing began when we all sat down together again, this time not as a family broken by secrets, but as a family ready to rebuild something new. The conversation felt different this time, less charged, more grounded. My father, for once, didn't try to dominate the conversation. He listened. Logan, too, seemed to be searching for the right words, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet sincerity. My mother, ever the mediator, was the one who broke the silence first, her soft voice carrying the weight of years of suppressed guilt. "We should have been there for you, Emily," she said, her eyes a little glassy with emotion. "I see now. I see everything we missed." I didn't know what to say at first. The words felt too heavy in my mouth. How do you respond when someone finally sees you for who you are? How do you accept an apology that's been so long in the making? I took a deep breath. "It's not about the apologies," I said, my voice steady but calm. "It's about us starting to understand each other. And that means we all have work to do." Logan nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice sincere. "I get it now. I didn't see the whole picture. I'm sorry, Em." For the first time, there was no defensiveness in his words. There was no condescension. Just a brother who had finally stepped out from the shadow of our father's expectations to see me for the first time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the end of all our issues, but it was a start. My father cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily, I've been wrong about so much, and I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I will try. I promise you that." His words weren't grandiose or filled with excuses. They were simple, and for once, I didn't need anything more. "I know, Dad," I replied, my voice soft. "I just want you to see me for who I really am." There was a long pause as we all sat in the quiet, letting the weight of those words settle between us. It was as if the walls that had separated us for so long had begun to crack. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It wasn't filled with tension or resentment. It was just peace. The kind of peace you can only find when you've faced the hardest truths, when you've said what needs to be said, and when you finally allowed the healing to begin. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. It wasn't a miracle, it wasn't an overnight transformation, but I could see it in the small moments. The way my father would stop to listen when I spoke. The way Logan started to ask more about my career, about my life outside of the family's shadow. We began to have real conversations, ones that didn't revolve around expectations or comparisons. We began to understand that we were all just people trying to figure things out in their own way. And as I walked through the doors of my childhood home once again, this time it felt different. The place that had once been a battleground of expectations now felt like a foundation, a place where I could build something new, not just with my family, but for myself. I had come back to this house a daughter who had been dismissed and overlooked, but The last few weeks had been a whirlwind. After everything we've gone through, the confrontations, the apologies, the painful truths, I could feel something shifting inside me. It wasn't just the way my family and I had started to reconnect, it was how I started to reconnect with myself. For so long, I had been waiting for someone else to see my worth. I had been running on the hope that if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, that eventually someone would recognize who I was and what I was capable of. But as the days passed, I began to realize something deeper. I didn't need anyone else's approval. I already had mine. It sounds simple, right? But for someone who had spent most of her life looking for validation from others, it wasn't that easy. The journey I had gone through wasn't just about proving my worth to my family or the world, it was about proving it to myself. I had spent so many years fighting for a place in my father's world, fighting to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be understood. But now, after everything we had gone through, I understood that the one thing I had been missing wasn't the approval of others, it was my own belief in myself. And it sounds simple, right? But for someone who had spent most of her life looking for validation from others, it wasn't that easy. The journey I had gone through wasn't just about proving my worth to my family or the world, it was about proving it to myself. I had spent so many years fighting for a place in my father's world, fighting to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be understood. But now, after everything we had gone through, I understood that the one thing I had been missing wasn't the approval of others. It was my own belief in myself. It sounds simple, right? But for someone who had spent most of her life looking for validation from others, it wasn't that easy. The journey I had gone through wasn't just about proving my worth to my family or the world. It was about proving it to myself. I had spent so many years fighting for a place in my father's world, fighting to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be understood. But now, after everything we had gone through, I understood that the one thing I had been missing wasn't the approval of others. It was my own belief in myself. And once I realized that, everything started to change. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long, the weight of trying to fit into someone else's mold, trying to live up to expectations that weren't mine to begin with, started to lift. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living, and that freedom was everything. When I finally let go of the need for my father's approval, when I stopped trying to prove myself to him and everyone else, I found peace. It didn't matter if they fully understood my path. It didn't matter if they ever fully embraced my choices. What mattered was that I had, and that was enough. I think that's the hardest part for most of us. We grow up trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to live up to what they want us to be. But the truth is, we are the ones who have to live with ourselves at the end of the day. We are the ones who have to be at peace with who we are, with the choices we make. And that's the power we hold. For me, this realization didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was gradual, a process of letting go of old fears and insecurities. It came with time, with self-reflection, and with a lot of tough conversations. But once I started to let go of what others thought of me, I realized just how much I had to offer. The version of me I had been hiding from the world wasn't just worthy, it was strong, it was capable, and it was more than enough. And so, as I stand here now sharing this with you, I want to say this. If you're feeling lost, if you're fighting for the approval of others, or if you're struggling to be seen for who you truly are, know this. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Your worth doesn't depend on their recognition. It starts with you. It always has. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. But it's also the most freeing thing you can do. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for validation. The truth is, you've always been enough. The key is learning to believe it. So, I want to leave you with this. Embrace who you are. Don't let anyone define your worth but you. You're the author of your own story, and it's time to write it your way. Don't wait for someone to give you a seat at the table. Take your place, own your space, and when the moment comes, show up. Because the strongest proof isn't in what you say, it's in who you quietly become. And trust me, the world will see you for who you truly are. As I walked out of my childhood home for what felt like the final time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over me. The house had always felt like a battleground, a place where I was constantly measured against expectations that were never mine to begin with. But now, as I stepped out onto the front steps, I realized something profound. I wasn't leaving something behind. I was moving forward. I looked back one last time at the house, the familiar sight of the chipped welcome mat, the faded porch light, and the tree out front that had been there longer than I had. For the first time, I wasn't filled with resentment or anger. I wasn't haunted by the past. Instead, I felt gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength I had gained, and for the new chapter I was about to write. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear, but it didn't need to be. I had spent so much of my life trying to control the narrative, trying to make others see me in a certain light. But now I realized that I didn't have to. I didn't have to wait for someone else's approval. I didn't need to be validated by anyone but myself. I had already earned it. And that's when it hit me. This journey, my story, it wasn't just for me. It wasn't just about reclaiming my own life. It was about showing others that they could do the same. If you feel lost, overlooked, or like you're trapped in a mold that's not your own, know this: you are not alone. We all have the power to redefine our stories, to rise above the expectations that others try to impose on us. This is your life, and you have the right to choose your path. If you're struggling to find your place, or if you're fighting for your own sense of worth, remember that you have everything inside of you to succeed. You don't need anyone's permission to be who you are. I want you to know that no matter where you come from or what you've been through, your story matters. Your journey is worth it. You deserve the chance to rewrite your own narrative, just like I did. You have the power to rise above the noise, to push through the doubts, and to step into the life you've always imagined. So, if you found something in my story that resonates with you, if it reminded you that you don't need to justify your existence to anyone, then I encourage you to take the first step today. Start living for yourself. Stop waiting for permission. Believe in your own power, your own worth. And if this story inspired you, if it gave you the courage to take that step forward, I'd love for you to share it. Like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more stories of perseverance, strength, and self-discovery. Let's build a community of people who are unapologetically themselves, who are rewriting their stories, one day at a time. So go ahead, take that first step. The journey ahead is waiting for you, and it's yours to claim. Remember, the strongest proof isn't what you say, it's who you quietly become. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.